ultimate has given you enough energy to carry for the next session. Before I actually call upon the next moderator to take over for the next session, I'd like to actually correct an injustice that should have been actually handled from the beginning, because we have some very, very important members of this community who play a major role in what we do. And I'd like to recognize them. And those are the members of the Regional Parliamentary Committee of the Lake Basin, Lake Chad Basin, who are in the room, very quietly over there, but playing a major role. And I want them to stand to be recognized so we can give a big round of applause. And it happened to be extremely gender balanced because there are actually 3 women who are sitting there. So thank you very much for what you do, and thank you for continuing to support this process. We appreciate it. Now, before I call upon our next moderator, I know some of the participants who are traveling back may have to do something with their visas, but somebody from the Ministry of Interior is here to support you. And I suggest that if you get a visa issue, you reach out to him. He will tell you what you need to do to make sure you're not staying in Chad. Although Chad being a beautiful country, if you want to stay here, I'm sure they do not mind to keep you here for quite some time. I'd like to now call upon Mr. Edward Callon, I should say, who is the UN Resident Coordinator for Nigeria, who's going to lead our next session on reintegration and social cohesion efforts on the local and regional level. So give a round of applause for our next moderator. We'll take over from here. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, welcome to this session, one of the most difficult sessions to manage and moderate, because at the heart of it is what people have been talking about here when we talk about national leadership and ownership. So if we are going to talk about rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion, the central piece in those discussions is all about national leadership and ownership. That is quite central in whatever we do in those areas. My name is Edward Callon, and I am the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria. I have been dealing with this Boko Haram crisis for quite some time now, and the issues are not really new to me. And also some of the approaches that we have developed over the years are not new either. But I want to start by first looking at the topic for discussion today. The topic was rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. But I hasten to broaden it to start looking at issues of return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion, because you cannot deal with those issues comprehensively. People have to go first back to their homes and start rebuilding their lives, reintegrate back into society, and get that society functioning. And it's very critical when we start looking at it from that perspective. Few issues I want to put up front before I call my distinguished panelists here. I would like this discussion to be as interactive as possible, and I will give my panel maximum 5 minutes so that we can get some feedback from you out there to enrich the communique that will be developed after this discussion. But as usual, there's something very good about me. I normally prepare notes, and then technology, I lose it because of technology, which I like, so that I don't read what I've prepared, so I just talk what I want to say. So, I mean, what are we talking about and what are we dealing with? As I said, I've been dealing with this situation for quite some time. There are a few realities that we have to put in sharp perspective. The crisis in the Lake Chad Basin is what we have used to call before a complex emergency. Why do we call it a complex emergency? It's a complex emergency because it presents a multi-dimensional issues that require collective action by all. It's a collaboration that is required between government, international partners, civil society, you name it, security, military, etc. All these elements are reflected in the complex emergency in the Lake Chad Basin. We have been analyzing it from the Nigerian side. So please, pardon me if I try to draw some inferences from my Nigeria perspective to more or less guide the discussions here. What have we learned in Nigeria about the Lake Chad Basin crisis? We are very clear in our mind that a three-pronged approach is required in the search of a durable solution to this crisis. One of those approaches is no doubt what you people have been talking about here, the security element. We strongly believe that there is need for a continuation of the counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism efforts, if for nothing else but to deal with hardcore Boko Haram. But I also point out that in Nigeria, I had to be very strong in advocating beyond the military effort. And I was clear to point out that we need to complement the military effort with a political process in the search of a durable solutions. And what were those elements that were critical in the political process? There are elements of conflict resolution, elements of reconciliation, elements of return and reintegration that are so critical, and elements of rebuilding back local economies, which are part of a process that needs to be pursued. The second approach is what we have been doing in the whole region. That is the humanitarian element. But there is one thing I have always pushed for, and I will continue pushing for it, that there is humanitarian needs in acute pockets in the Lake Chad Basin region. And we should continue providing those critical assistance for people to survive. And I strongly believe that in doing so, we need to be conscious of the fact that we should not create dependency on humanitarian aid, but rather try to provide humanitarian assistance built around a resilience-based approach. And this approach is critical so that we can help the affected population to cope with the impact of the crisis, recover from those crises, and also enable them to undertake what we call transformative change in the medium and long term. We are here on a stabilization strategy. I think the stabilization strategy to me is that fine thread that cuts across, that prepares that foundation that is required in finding the solutions to it. The third approach is definitely addressing the root causes of this crisis. And everybody here was talking about this yesterday. It is developmental, long, prolonged development deficit. We are talking about poverty that is very much multidimensional from our perspective. We're talking about governance and human rights deficits, and also climate vulnerabilities that are compounding the problem in the Lake Chad Basin. So we have those realities cutting across. What are we trying to do? We try, as humanitarian actors and as nationals, to try to reduce risks and vulnerabilities as much as we can. But my push has always been prevention always, where possible, and development where feasible. And then, of course, humanitarian assistance where necessary. So it's quite critical that in our approach, we try to sequence those realities we are dealing with. Prevention first, development where feasible, and then, last but not the least, humanitarian assistance where necessary. And I think that thinking is so important when we start talking about issues of return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. I mean, that was a quick summary from my side since I lost my notes I prepared. And now I will call on my distinguished panel to come up to stage so that we can start the discussions better. I am told that there are some slight changes in the panel here. I think the first panelist was supposed to be His Excellency Mr. Babagana Umaro Zulum, the Executive Governor of Borno State, who apparently is out on in a very important meeting, and she has requested Madam Kolo to represent her on this, to represent him on this panel. Madam Kolo, please. The second panelist is His Excellency Alhaji Mia Mala Boni, Executive Governor of Yobe State, or representative. The third panelist is Miss Kelly Lowe, Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. And last, but most important, our host, Mr. Haidara Abdullahi, Ministry of Interior Representative of Nigeria. Niger, sorry. Okay, welcome to this discussion. The issues we are supposed to look at are as follows. We are supposed to look at the issues of first rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. But I decided to broaden it to include the issues of return that are critical, and issues of rehabilitation, reintegration, and then social cohesion. To enable participation from the audience, I actually encourage you to limit your intervention to 5 minutes, if possible, so that we can get inputs from the audience there to enrich the recommendations that we'll come up with at the end of this session. And as I laid out the situation to you, definitely people have to return first. But there's a lot of misnomer on the issues of return. And of course, there is need for a return strategy that can guide that effort. But return strategy in the context in the Lake Chad Basin does not only mean that people have to go back to their village, where they came from. And one of the challenges I had when I talked with former President Obasanjo was, are former communities still viable entities to return to? Are there other ways we can get people to reintegrate where they are? But then before we even discuss one or two issues, the issue of land came into sharp perspective. So he told me, welcome my son, but you go deal with the land tenure issues of Nigeria first. So that was quite interesting. But the focus on return and a common regional return strategy that can be customized and adapted to various specifics of the basin is quite clear. But we call for the Kampala Convention. That's all what we are calling for. People return in safety, return with dignity. The returns are well informed, and of course, there are some basic services in place before they return to their home of origin. Again, coming to my Nigeria dynamics, we have a very interesting dynamics in Northeast Nigeria. 1.8 million people currently displaced in camps, but we also have 1.6 million people that are returning to safe areas in both Yobe and Adamawa states. So we have that dynamics we are dealing with. So do we have to focus on the full-blown humanitarian response alone? No. So in fact, in Northeast Nigeria, we are clear that a holistic approach is critical, and that we should work on the humanitarian development, security, and peace nexus as a framework that guides the search of durable solutions in Northeast Nigeria. So that's the first issue of return. Then, of course, rehabilitation. I want rehabilitation also to be broadened in the sense that we are here on a stabilization discussion, and you heard the panel before me that stabilization is talking about providing basics, creating foundation of hope, moving forward. What are those basics? I have noticed in Northeast Nigeria, in Yobe and Adamawa, that people left to go back home, but they were displaced multiple times. They were not able to reach home because of lack of basic social services, health, water, sanitation, etc. So the humanitarian needs never ended. What we saw is that people moved closer to their homes and they were displaced because they cannot reach their final destination. So those were other dimensions that we dealt with there. I'm sure there are similarities also looking at the situation in the basin. Then the whole issue of reintegration comes into play. Bringing back communities, bringing back hope into communities, which are quite critical. And then, of course, how are you going to live amicably with one another? What is that glue of reintegration and rehabilitation that are so critical for social cohesion? So those are the issues. What I want from you is look at those 4 critical issues. We want to learn from you. What do you see are the opportunities in your various contexts? 2, what are those challenges that you have to deal with? And then the last but not the least, 1 key recommendation that you can bring back to this forum to inform the final communique on issues of return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. If you agree, that's the way I would like to proceed. But I want to put in sharp context in the issues of return and rehabilitation. That's the case of former Boko Haram associates, which is a very thorny issue. I am not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I just wanted to quote a UN Security Council resolution 2369, which outlines, and I quote, to assess and investigate suspected individuals whom they have reasonable grounds to take appropriate actions, including by considering appropriate prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration measures in compliance with domestic and international law. The second element that is critical when you start looking at handling and treating Boko Haram associates is the whole aspect of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. The issues of Boko Haram associate does not fall under the classical issues of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, because we are not talking about a peace agreement. For this to happen, there has to be a peace agreement and there has to be a ceasefire. So that's another context dealing with handling Boko Haram. But there is another call by the UN Security Council resolution that has been calling on member states to develop screening, prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration strategies that needs to be developed by member states, and also recommended that this is done in a more coordinated manner. And I think if there is one area that needs harmonization and coordination within the Lake Basin, is how you are going to handle and treat Boko Haram associates. So we have 3 levels of people of interest or concerns in this discussion. You have people displaced that are returning back to their homes. We call them displaced persons. You have refugees that are in neighboring countries that will someday return back home. And then you have former combatants. Some of them might voluntarily leave the Boko Haram sect and decide to come back and reintegrate to society. I just want you to note that, because why I am not focusing on former combatants alone, because the issues are bigger than former combatants. And if you start talking about social cohesion, you actually have to look at the population that is affected in a comprehensive manner, or else you are going to have communities coming back to you to say, oh, you are prioritizing these people, are you encouraging them to encourage the other youths to become Boko Haram because they will be taken care of, etc. So there are those sentiments out in the communities. But I want you to reflect on that while you look at those opportunities, challenges, and making a recommendation. I think I will pause there, and I will call on the first panelist, Madam Yabawa Kolo, to give us her preliminary input. Over to you, Madam Kolo.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. From the perspective of Borno State, we've done a lot of activities towards ensuring that social cohesion, peace building, and also organized return of some of the communities, as well as some challenging and very critical issues like that of reintegrating or reinsertion of former combatants, popularly called Boko Haram, and persons associated with Boko Haram, wives and children of Boko Haram. In our effort, the first landmark achievement that we did, which is supported by the UNDP, was the workshop on policy formulation towards reconciliation and reintegration of communities and vis-a-vis victims, Boko Haram, repentance, and also between survivors and perpetrators. So in the 3 days workshop that was held in Maiduguri between 17-18 of July 2018, the key recommendation that we made collectively, the government actors, non-government actors, alongside with the international community, that henceforth all integration, rehabilitation, and resettlement should be community-based, with traditional and religious leaders playing very key role because they are connected to the grassroots, and two, they are the leaders of faith and culture, where we have issue of institutional rigidity towards culture and other things vis-a-vis the victims who felt their grievances are unaddressed. They will bring both the parties a dialogue to see that nobody is left unattended to. In addition to that, we also make very significant point that there are other groups that to participate in the rehabilitation and reintegration process. This group includes the women, youth, and also some strata of the society from the academia, including the private sector. So all in Borno State, we have our issues, especially where the worst hits. In addition to that, up to now, we have more than 23 functional camps, and the less population in all the camp, you can get 10,000 people up to now. So the issue of even return, issue of social cohesion, peace building, reinsertion of the members of Boko Haram is still remaining same challenging issue. But going forward, we are also able to develop a return strategy document jointly signed by the former governor of Borno State and Mr. Edward Kalon himself, where we mention some conditions that need to be taken into consideration before we do return, so that once we do return, the return is very perfect. It is not back and forth return, and where people are security, safety, and others are compromised, it is not part of the deal. Mainly, in the document, we are able to say access to livelihood is number one, access to water and sanitation, re-establishment of healthcare services, re-establishment of education, and also to have our governor's popular policy of inclusive, participatory, and people-driven activity. We also ensure that community participation, involvement, and accountability is key, in addition to mainstreaming of gender and social inclusion. All this effort must integrate the perspective, especially of the state government. Everybody should be carried along. For instance, the first return we had, the civil society are here with me. We have a lot of gaps and challenges. The popular Burma return, where some of the stakeholders are left behind. But we learn our lesson that we always call all the stakeholders, and the major achievement that we did, some of the level of coordination has been improved, because whenever we are returning, we need to sit down with the overall boss of the UN, that is the UN OCHA, and other UN NGO forum, community, and the IDP themselves to respect some of the international convention and treaty, most popularly the Kampala Convention, where the minimum conditions for return, restoration of livelihood, like the agricultural activity, though we have challenge of limited farmland, and also the restoration of basic services and infrastructure, return of civil administration, basic documentation. All these are part of the integration, reconciliation, what have you, strategy that we have put in place. And I cannot end without commending the international community. They came to us, they have the best practices, they've given us the technical expertise, while we, at our own end, we used to give them the sensitivity of the culture and the religion and government policies that are shortfall of all these elements or variables that are needed in reconciliation, reintegration, and also resettlement. And other partners that are also doing very well in the resettlement business is the World Bank, where they give them the minimum packages for return. So we are able to take the ownership and the lead to coordinate all the actors and also others that are involved in the new way of working. And coming to the issue of reconciliation, you know, the dialogue, the community dialogue is the major part that is missing. But with the current happenings, the trend has changed. Now you can see quite a number of traditional institutions. We came with the Zana Bogoma of Borno, who is representing the highest traditional authority in Borno State, that is the Shehus Palace. And in the policy document, we said for the community-driven intervention, the palace should be secretariat, and for the government, the Ministry of RRR, that is Ministry of Reconstruction, Rehabilitation, and Reintegration, is the secretariat. The UN is also represented through OCHA, so that is how we are doing our return. This is how we are doing a settlement between aggrieved parties, survivors, and also repentee Boko Haram. Another very important point that I need to mention is our synergy with the military. Most of the Boko Haram, they attend institutional training at what we call SAFE corridor located in Gombe State. After their graduation from the SAFE corridor, the state government received them. We have what we call the Rehabilitation Center at Bulumkutu, where the Ministry of Women Affairs, SEMA, and other key government agencies are attending to those surroundings of Boko Haram. But we have very nasty experience when they were taken to Bakassi camp for reintegration. The community rejected. Some, they even faced another trauma. Some fainted, some ran away. So now, up to now, we are trying to re-strategize to see that we may appeal to other states, maybe other regional countries. Maybe for the meantime, we maybe look for neutral venue for them, neutral location for them to go and start their life. Then gradually they will come back to us with the assistance of the religious and community leaders. So far so good. These are our efforts in infrastructure. UNDP has developed the Ngom Modern Village, and we've launched the Ngom Village with basic facility, what we call building back better. Our people there, they have the health facility, they have education. They also have some social safety nets in the area of village loan saving, whereas the small economy is also reimagined again. So these are some of the activities we do as we discuss. Since it is interactive, I don't want to take much of the time. Let me hand over the mic to the next colleague so that we can continue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Kolo. Now that will take me to the governor of Yobe State as the next speaker. Over to you, sir. But let's try to be as brief as possible. Don't repeat what has been said. If a good idea has been said, Please, let's move on faster. Yeah.
Thank you, moderator. I will start with the issue of return. You know, at the peak of the Boko Haram insurgency, 2 local governments were completely taken over by the Boko Haram in Yobe State. They made one of their headquarters at one of their local governments. So with the success of the military, in fact, they blew up the bridge that linked the local government headquarters with the state capital. So it was very, very difficult for them for accessing it. It was a federal government road. So what we did was immediately after that, we sat down with the military. We took over the construction of the road and the bridge as a state government, although it was a federal road. That provided access to these 2 local governments that have that problem. So immediately after the provision of that access, in fact, especially at the peak of the insurgency, what we did was, the road was constructed at the peak of the insurgency. We have to sit down with the military, with the vigilante. They have to demine the road for about 3 kilometers. They walk from 4 o'clock. They end up by 10 o'clock in the morning, end up 4 o'clock. So it took them about 1 year or so to construct the road completely. So with that construction of the road, then it provided opportunities for the state government, for the humanitarian partners to go back now to start providing the basic infrastructures, especially in terms of water, health facility, education that were completely destroyed in those areas. So with that development, people from other local governments that moved out from those local governments started going back to their respective villages. So that led to the closure of all the 2 camps we had in Yobe State, and we provided facilities for them to return. So this facilitated the return of the communities because the state, together with the development partners, with the state government, with the federal agencies, most of the facilities were rehabilitated or currently being rehabilitated. In those host communities,
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
we have communities that are resident in host communities that return to the home communities. In some villages, there are some that came from Borno State. There are some that came from other states of the state. So what we did was we provided land for some of these communities in those areas. For example, in Kukareta, there was a village. We provided land to the returnees. There's from Borno State. We provided land. We provided them with farmland, and they agreed to stay in those areas. So in all the host communities, they are now at liberty to stay or to go back to their respective villages. Then finally, on the issue of reintegration. The integration is one of the very basic problems we are facing, especially in some of these communities now, because the Boko Haram respondents in some of the communities were rejected. That's one of the major problems. So, but we have some Boko Haram respondents that came from Borno State. They are now settling in Yobe, in some of the villages. The community has accepted them. But for those who are around in those villages, I think they had a lot of problems, especially the hardcore Boko Harams that were known to have killed a lot of people. So that created a lot of problem for the people, for them to stay in those communities where there's heavy. So this is a big problem. If it's a hardcore Boko Haram and he later repents, it's different from the person who is a collaborator of the Boko Haram. The collaborators are usually accepted because of the lack of because of the acceptance by the community, because of the level of their collaboration. But for the hardcore that have been known to have carried out arms, but they later repented, now some of the communities find it difficult to integrate them exactly in the same community, in the villages they are having. And the same problem we are going to have with Borno, we are having in Yobe State again. In terms of humanitarian activities, most of these villages have a lot of need for humanitarian assistance now. Most of them in the villages, they will need humanitarian assistance because their means of livelihood have already been destroyed. Government and other development partners are working together with the state and they're providing the humanitarian assistance to those communities again. Then finally, on the issue of social cohesion, is one issue we have been discussing with the traditional rulers and the religious leaders in order to work together to ensure that this issue of Boko Haram, even if after this passing phase of social integration, after this passing phase does not emanate again. And the most issue to do with this social cohesion is for the communities, to sit down, discuss issues, and address the issues on their own terms. Not for us at the level of the state to be imposing issues that will find the difficulties for them to integrate. So what we do now is in the communities where this Boko Haram, where these insurgencies have taken place, we have local government committees, we have ward committees, we have traditional committees. They work together with the community to be discussing this issue so that with the support of other agencies and development partners, we work together with them, address these issues of social cohesion so that this problem of Boko Haram, which has been one of the major problems that has affected these communities, does not happen again. So the education. Sorry, please.
Yeah. If you can try to wrap up now.
Okay.
Time. Yeah.
Education is key to all these issues. Education is key to those particular issues. And by education, what I mean is educating even the imams. The Boko Haram started because of a religious problem which some of religious leaders as Muhammad Yusuf started saying that the formal education is bad or other things. So we have been engaging the religious leaders to discuss with them and then also impose some preaching laws, those that have not been able, that people who are not about to preach should not be allowed to be preaching in the communities. So these are some of the issues we have been discussing, and these are issues we have been able to address. But as we have been discussing and bringing some of your opinions and suggestions, we can discuss this issue and expand it further. But I don't want to waste much of your time in this particular issue. But it's important, finally, to give one very good recommendation, which I think you have already mentioned, on this issue of rehabilitation, reintegration, and the social cohesion. One recommendation which we would like to give is all development agencies and all government agencies that are responsible for this, in the support for this reintegration, rehabilitation, should have one common goal of creating a synergy between the agencies responsible for the provision of the provision of this type of assistance in the communities. So this, I think, should be one of the reasons we should discuss and then come up with the recommendation again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That takes me to my colleague from SETED.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Is this this working? Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think that you've done a wonderful job at setting out the comprehensive context of these issues and enabling me to get straight to some of the points. You mentioned the preoccupation of Resolution 2396 of the Security Council. I should also say here that my office is attached to the Security Council, and it very much welcomes all the efforts in the Lake Chad Basin and the region with the regional strategy to move ahead and address these complex challenges comprehensively and through a multi-stakeholder approach. The issues of rehabilitation and reintegration and social cohesion are part of your comprehensive response. At the same time, in order to do this effectively, to reduce risks and to maximize prospects for success, you also have to address issues of accountability for serious terrorist acts and offenses and serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. We heard from the two other speakers that there have been occasions where the community has rejected persons attempting to reintegrate back into their communities. So to put it another way, holding individuals accountable for the terrible crimes that they have committed will protect the integrity of your process to work towards reconciliation and social cohesion through effective rehabilitation and reintegration. It's not possible to prosecute all persons associated to Boko Haram, nor would it be appropriate. But making informed decisions on who to prosecute will safeguard your prospects for long-term peace by ensuring that spoilers who have committed the most egregious crimes will not benefit from their actions. This depends on a shared criteria and commitment across the regions. This is why your efforts to work collaboratively together, crossing borders in your efforts, is so important. Where prosecution is not possible or not appropriate is also equally important to take informed decisions on who can be directly rehabilitated and reintegrated and what that means. I just want to touch on the challenge to address these efforts and tailor them to the persons that need to have this support. We've heard about how women and youth in your region are agents for positive change, and in fact, they are the hope for your future. Boko Haram has also targeted the women and youth of your communities. No other terrorist group in the world has had so many suicide bombers who are women and children. So this presents a complex challenge for you as you try to move ahead and rehabilitate and reintegrate these persons back into your communities. I come to the last area I want to highlight, and that's with respect to the greater issue of social cohesion and the role of communities. Communities have been the targets of Boko Haram. Civilians are still the main targets of terrorist attacks. These attacks are ongoing. It means that in order to be good partners in the process towards rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion, that communities themselves must be stabilized in order to be a part of that process. You've already heard from the other speakers, so I won't repeat what they have said in terms of their work on these challenging issues. To respond to Mr. Callan's request to address what we can do to give hope to the way forward, I think the previous speakers have already given hope. There is a lot of vibrant activities and efforts made in your regions, and we can only encourage you and continue to support you in these efforts. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, thank you very much. We now come to the last speaker, our host, who is going to give us a quick overview from his perspective. I'm hoping that if we do that in 5 minutes, then you guys will have 10 minutes for discussion, and then we can summarize. Over to you, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur. Bonjour, Excellence, Monsieur le Ministre de l'Hydraulique et de l'Assainissement, Monsieur les gouverneurs des régions et États fédérés du Nigeria. Chers collègues, étant donné que hier, le gouverneur de la région de Difa a éloquemment exposé la situation sur la région de Difa, je vais juste m'en tenir sur les questions de réhabilitation, de réintégration et de cohésion sociale. Alors, on va partager l'expérience que nous menons au Niger. 2 circuits de réhabilitation, de réintégration sont en cours au Niger. Le premier circuit est conduit auprès des repentis, nous allons y revenir tout à l'heure, sous la conduite du ministère de l'Intérieur et de la Sécurité publique. Le deuxième circuit est conduit auprès des jugés relaxés, des éléments des ex-combattants Boko Haram, par la haute autorité à la consolidation de la paix et le ministère de la Justice. Donc voilà les 2 circuits que nous expérimentons à l'heure actuelle au Niger. Mais pour mieux comprendre comment nous sommes arrivés au repenti, c'est à l'appel des autorités de la République du Niger, dont en premier chef, son Excellence M. Issouf Mahamadou, président de la République, et sous la conduite de son Excellence M. Mohamed Bazoum, ministre de l'Intérieur, qui a lancé un appel en direction des combattants Boko Haram à déposer les armes. Dès décembre 2016, 20 combattants ont volontairement remis leurs armes et se sont mis dans la logique de revenir vers la paix. Comme les 20 sont là, il fallait bien trouver un centre d'accueil. Et le gouvernement du Niger s'est engagé à construire un centre d'accueil afin donc de pouvoir placer ces 20 combattants qui aujourd'hui sont au nombre de 237. Ex-combattants repentis volontairement. Pour mieux réussir, le gouvernement a décidé de mettre en place un programme qui est axé sur 7 stratégies. La reddition, le respect des droits humains, l'appropriation nationale, la transparence et l'approche inclusive. C'est ça qui sous-tend le programme national de réhabilitation, de réinsertion. Et il fallait mettre un cadre légal en place parce que notre dispositif corpus judiciaire, qu'on appelle le code pénal, a prévu de manière superficielle, il fallait approfondir. Ainsi, le code pénal a été modifié pour être complété afin de tenir compte des repentis volontaires. Et il fallait donner au centre un statut réglementaire et un arrêté est pris pour créer officiellement le centre. Bien sûr qu'il y a eu la création de manière antérieure, depuis 2014, du pôle judiciaire de lutte contre le terrorisme, qui vient donc étoffer tout ce corpus juridique. Et enfin, nous avons adapté tous ces textes à la résolution 2349 des Nations Unies pour ne pas être en porte-à-faux avec le reste des pays membres du bassin du lac Tchad. Donc, les phases qui ont été dédiées au processus de gestion des repentis dans le cadre de la réhabilitation, la réintégration et la cohésion sociale, bien sûr que les activités de communication, sur la déradicalisation, sur la pratique religieuse. À titre d'anecdote, je dirais que parmi les repentis, on a observé que plus de 50% ne savent même pas réciter la sourate de la Fatiha. Et pourtant, ils se réclament d'être au nom de Dieu. Ils tuaient au nom de Dieu. Nous comprenons alors qu'il y a nécessité de rééduquer, de resocialiser, de faire une éducation psychosociale de ces individus, parce qu'ils ont été dans une autre philosophie qui n'est pas du tout celle qui sied dans un peuple civilisé. Donc, la reddition commence par l'accueil, le profilage et la réception au centre des repentis de Goudoumaria. On l'appelle centre de réinsertion des ex-combattants de Boko Haram à Goudoumaria. Ce centre existe. J'espère que peut-être que nos voisins auront l'occasion de visiter un jour ce centre. Alors, ce centre n'est pas une prison. Ce n'est pas un internement administratif. Mais c'est un centre passerelle entre une vie tourmentée en amont vers une vie normalisée en aval. C'est vrai que ce centre a été mis en place par les efforts du gouvernement, construit par le gouvernement avec l'aide de certains partenaires techniques et des ONG internationales pour doter le centre d'un forage, de l'électricité pour améliorer le cadre de vie. Aujourd'hui, grâce au projet PBF, avec l'appui du PNUD, nous venons de doter le centre de 2 ateliers de formation et des matériels d'équipement technique pour aider à la formation. Les 237 vont démarrer cette formation dans quelques semaines et finir dans 6 mois. Donc la réhabilitation consiste d'abord à la rééducation religieuse, la formation professionnelle. Et cette formation professionnelle est certifiée. Le repenti qui a subi ces étapes ne peut être injecté à la vie normale qu'après une certification. Et les récidivistes sont repris et remis à la justice, parce qu'ils ont renoncé donc à leur repentance. Alors,
Can we please try to summarize,
je vais
please?
être bref pour dire que la réintégration s'accompagne avec la réconciliation. Donc, dans le programme national de gestion de la réhabilitation de la réintégration, nous avons également mis la réconciliation. N'oublions pas que ce sont nos compatriotes qui ont pris les armes contre leurs frères. Pour qu'il y ait un bon retour à la paix, à la cohésion sociale, il faut qu'on réconcilie. Cette réconciliation a déjà été énumérée un peu par le gouverneur de Yobé, à travers l'éducation et la représentante du gouverneur de Borno, à travers l'éducation religieuse parmi les populations victimes et affectées. Je dirais qu'aujourd'hui, nous nous réjouissons de tout ce que les partenaires ont fait en direction pour que nous puissions expérimenter cela. Mais, comble, aujourd'hui, nous sommes en fin de projet PBF pour le centre de Goudoumaria depuis décembre 2018. Et le gouvernement a repris à son compte tout ce qui est en train de se passer sur Goudoumaria, c'est-à-dire l'alimentation, la prise en charge, les produits pharmaceutiques pour ces 237 personnes, jusqu'à leur sortie. Mais nous avons acquis tout ce qui est équipement, kit d'accompagnement, après la formation, pour la réinsertion. Donc c'est pour dire que notre appel en direction, ou bien notre recommandation, est que les partenaires, parce que notre projet là, s'inscrit dans le 3e pilier de la stratégie de stabilisation régionale, la stratégie régionale de stabilisation dans le bassin du lac Tchad. Et c'est les objectifs stratégiques 11 et 12 que nous sommes en train de mettre en œuvre. Donc nous recommandons à tous nos partenaires encore d'accompagner ce centre pour pouvoir expérimenter. Parce que l'objectif final, c'est-à-dire fin 2020, est de 33 000 personnes formées, parce que nous avons respecté le principe 1-20. Un ex-combattant formé pour 20 victimes ou affectées par la crise Boko Haram. Je me soumets au questionnement et je me réponds. Merci.
Thank you very much. We have very limited time for 3 questions. I will take one from this end, one from here, and one from this end. Who has got the mic? Let me start from that. There's a lady there. I want to hear the voice of another woman. There.
There's a lady there. Please be brief.
Thank you very much. I'm going to briefly present myself. Je m'introduis rapidement. Je m'appelle Marchev et je travaille pour Search for Common Ground. Je voudrais remercier tous les panélistes en fait aussi ici d'avoir mentionné des points très importants. Le modérateur a mentionné un point important que j'aimerais poser la question. Comment est-ce que les différents pays, les différents gouverneurs peuvent en fait coordonner entre eux sur surtout certainement la stratégie en fait de réintégration des ex-combattants? On voit que le Niger a déjà avancé et nous mettons en œuvre un programme là-dessus aussi. Comment est-ce qu'on peut aussi avoir un cadre de leçons apprises ou d'échanges sur ce que le Niger est en train de faire avec les autres pays? Merci.
Here? Here, yes, please. Please be brief.
Okay. Thank you very much for this important opportunity. I think the question is when you talk of issue of social cohesion, there are two important elements I want us to look into. So far across this region, there are two parallel educational systems going. One is the formal educational system, and the other is informal educational system. Specifically, I'm talking about the Sangaya or the Quranic schools, which in this particular region, in this area, there are more deeper informal educational Sangayas and Quranic schools. And they are divided into different levels. Some of them are they live more in the rural area, suburban, and some are even mobile Quranic Sangaya schools that move from place to place. And these are the breeding ground or strong support for what becomes what the governor, deputy governor have just clarified from Yobe State saying, these are what you saw on the ground. So reality is, what are the governors this platform is going to do as regards this important phenomenon? Because the two important things there, as far as that area is concerned, is that we need to see how do you reform? How do you create a process of reformation? So without throwing it away, reforming the Sangaya and Quranic schools in our villages and suburban area and bringing them to the front. How do you create a hybrid of educational system? And where, because the issue of ideological base for Boko, which is education, is haram, come from this particular strong area. And whatever we do, as long as we do not address this physically, finding a sustainable solution that will help the malams in these Quranic schools to have a new focus, a new capacity, will go a long way. And I feel there is a model right now. If you study the Katsina model of transforming the Sangaya schools, it's something that the whole region needs to study and look into that deeply. The second issue that is very clear that I want to raise is the issue of the returnees, the formers, accepting the formers in different community. In some it has worked, in some it was very devastating. And I feel strongly the key issue of either it is amnesty, either it's truth, justice, and reconciliation, and the concept of you can't talk with them, you don't need to talk with them, lest they have to repent before we accept them and we have our condition. These are areas I feel we need to address if we really are going to talk about reintegration of this particular group back into our society.
Now, I will now ask one governor, whoever wants to say any of the governors, just on input. I'm looking for a governor. A traditional leaders? Okay, that's good. Give it to a traditional leader. And that will be the last intervention. We have to summarize.
Well, still building on the issues of reintegration and cohesion. Particularly, I was involved in the DRR program at Gombe. I took part in oath administration the other time. The representative of our governor had said it. The first batch that was brought to Borno was vehemently rejected. And the second one that we did, of over 200 repentees, I think up till this time, they were not brought into Maiduguri. What I want this whole to understand is that there is nothing like repentant Boko Haram at all. Yes, they were quarantined at Malan Sidi. Some of them were quite okay rehabilitated in terms of skills acquisition. And some of them were also de-radicalized because there are a lot of Islamic scholars that were brought in to go about the de-radicalization processes. But our major problem is that there was a time when such, repentant Boko Haram were released, and they went back to Sambisa, and they sent out video. So what I am trying to tell you now is that building cohesion, particularly among the communities, we are the community leaders. We have bear the brunt of what Boko Haram is all about. And these repentant, so-called repentant Boko Haram, who have, because when Madam was talking, I was really disturbed because there are a lot of ambiguities in some of the laws of the United Nations. Because you have said it, that you cannot prosecute. And then you de-radicalize, and then you also reintegrate into societies. This is someone who had, because you have international laws based on humanitarian principles, and whoever that has, perpetrated anything or that has infringed on your fundamental human right, you have the right to prosecute that person or to take him to court or to whatever. So our problem here.
Let me correct that.
Yeah.
The resolution did not say you cannot prosecute.
Okay.
If you have all proven reasons that that person was a terrorist, then you can prosecute that person. The resolution doesn't say you honor them if they have been terrorists.
Well, time without number, the press and the world had been telling us that the Boko Haram is the worst terrorist in the whole world, because you cannot even compare them to ISIS of what they have been doing against humanity. So therefore, what I want you to understand as a forum is that there are, as given to us by the late Gajigal Timari in one of his reports when President Jonathan appointed a committee to investigate and to look into what Boko Haram is all about, he had given us 3 categories of Boko Haram. The first Boko Haram are those who have accepted whatever that Muhammad Yusuf had given them in the name of teachings. And they are in it, and they have taken part. They are the worst Boko Haram. The second Boko Haram is those who are just indoctrinated without even knowing the, doctrine of what they have been now preaching. Then the third one are those who are against the society because of some of the social injustices.
Can we summarize now, please?
So because of that, we should always consider that Boko Haram, number one, is not about religion.
My facilitator is getting very impatient.
Sorry, please. It's not about religion. And 2, they have committed a lot of atrocities, but the bottom line is we as leaders will as much as possible tell our people to, accept whoever that is being brought back, but on certain conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think a lot has been said. Let me try to just capture some of the few recommendations that is worth taking forward on the issues of return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. I think the first one is at the strategic level, and that is, no doubt, the stabilization strategy and the stabilization facility. I see them as a foundation of hope to bridge the humanitarian development, security, and peace nexus. So that is what I expect from the regional stabilization strategy and also the stabilization facility, is that foundation of hope that this strategy is going to bring in helping us bridge the humanitarian development, security, and peace nexus. Number 2, what became very clear here is that humanitarian assistance does not end with the return of people. And as the governor here said, at the early phases of rehabilitation, there is still humanitarian needs until people are able to start rebuilding their livelihoods. So it's also very important to put that in sharp context when you are preparing the strategy. The third here is the call for a harmonized approach and cross-fertilization of best practices in dealing with the issues of former combatant, and also on the issues of return and reintegration. So there is room for harmonization of approaches in the basin, and there's also room for cross-fertilization of best practices, which is required moving forward. The third issue that came here was the need for a policy framework on return and rehabilitation and reintegration at the outset. And here again, there is room for cross-fertilization of experiences in the basin on what we can learn from each country in terms of policies on return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion. It also became very clear in the discussion here that community-based approaches are critical for social cohesion and stabilization, and therefore issues of education becomes extremely important in that in the process of the community-based approach. The other recommendation here is a broad-based engagement by all actors that is critical to address the issues of coordination that comes across in most of the discussions here. So I think we have been able to touch on this complex issue. That's why I said it was a difficult one. But I also want to leave with one clear way forward. The only way you can deal with issues of return, rehabilitation, reintegration, and social cohesion requires a strong national leadership and ownership. It has to be led and it has to be owned. And the inspiration for partners should come from you as leaders. This now I'm talking to the governors. You know your people better, and you should be able to advise the international actors, civil society, and other partners that are coming to help you. So it's really important that we nurture that here. I know there has been a lot of discussion on coordination problems during this conference. But again, I want to make this point very clear. Where there is national leadership and ownership, you can coordinate. But if there is no national leadership and ownership, you cannot coordinate. So let's stop the blame game. And I call on the governors again, lead and own this response. You are the only people who can address this problem. My facilitator is here. And also on the UN resolution, there's a lot of controversy around that resolution of dealing with the former combatant, as you raised it. But where prosecution is legitimate and justifiable, it should be pursued. But can you have a regional approach? That's why I'm calling for a harmonized approach and cross-fertilization of best practices. Niger has tried, maybe what Niger has tried, Nigeria can use a little bit of it. Nigeria has tried a return strategy, and it is creating a framework from there. What can you learn from that return strategy in the basin? So this has been a very useful discussion, and I'm very happy I lost my notes, because then I was speaking frankly from my heart. I was not following what was on the piece of paper. But this has been useful. Again, I think the regional stabilization strategy is a good start in the right direction, and thanks to African Union, LCBC, UNDP, and all other stakeholders that have contributed in looking at the regional dimension of this crisis. Because for a long time, we thought it was a national or country-based response, but now it is clear to all of us that it is a regional crisis and requires a regional solution. Thank you very much.
Indeed, a difficult session handled with elegance and patience. So once again, a round of applause to our moderator. I would like to thank our speakers. You may join your seat again. Thank you very much. Thank you. Merci. Now, before we break for lunch, we have to make some adjustment on the program. Adjustment number one, the session that's supposed to come right after this one, we'll move it to the afternoon after lunch to 2:45. The good news is the moderators and the speakers have accepted to actually join the session in the afternoon so that we can have some food before we come back and have that session, which is equally important. So we'll break for lunch and then come back at 2:45. The second changes I want to announce, you may have seen on the program, we had to have a discussion, or at least an acceptance of the next host of this forum. And that is why before you break for lunch, I'd like to invite the governor of the extreme north of Cameroon to say a few words about that opportunity to host the next session, because he has to catch a plane, and that way we will then break for lunch. Governor, if I can just invite you on stage. Monsieur le Gouverneur. Can you give him a big round of applause for venir en scène? Merci, Monsieur le Gouverneur.
Monsieur le Président du Forum des gouverneurs